Hey everyone, welcome back to the Rosales Media For Change podcast. I'm your host, Miguel Rosales, and today's guest is Kathryn Willetts, an incredible architect who designs skyrise buildings, homes, and transforms old spaces into stunning new ones. She's originally wanted to be a fashion designer, but her creative journey led her into the world of architecture. Kathryn also opens up about overcoming personal adversity and shares amazing advice for high school students who are figuring out their own paths. Let's dive into it.
In essence, architecture is the great thing about that career is that it combines aesthetics with technical abilities, technical knowledge, and social skills to solve really complex problems. So that's what makes it challenging and fun and a career that you never get tired of. You're not going to get bored. So designing a building involves so many different considerations, the use and the user. So it's not only, oh, is this going to be a place where somebody lives, or is it going to be a restaurant, or is it going to be a technical office? It involves the user too. And it involves who's going to build the building. So there's a developer who would be the money person. They get the money, they have some land, they have this big idea of something they want to do that's going to make money for them. There's a speculator. Usually a speculator is building something that he doesn't have a use for yet, but he knows that somebody will have a use for it, and so he wants to build something really general that somebody will be able to, that he'll be able to sell to somebody for a lot of money. And then there's government entities. Governments are always building stuff. And then there's a personal use, which is so nice to build something that you are in direct contact with the people that are going to use it. And then you get the opportunity to explore so many aspects of their life and figure out what they need and how you can fulfill their needs. So that makes it a very satisfying job.
Got it. Thank you so much for the recap on that. So you told me like all the different steps that goes into architecture, and from what I've seen for specifically architecture is it's not just like one done for all job. There's like different parts of it. And for you specifically, what was that role for you like? Like what was your main focus in architecture?
It changed over time as I got experience and as I focused on different aspects of the opportunities, because you can work on anything. As in most professions, there's a lot of opportunity for specialization. So you can do a high-rise building. I did one once, but it was an existing high-rise building, and it was a historic building. It had been medical offices in downtown San Diego, and there was no longer, that was not a useful use of that building anymore because it did not have all the things that a contemporary medical office needed. So the building was basically useless as it was, and it wasn't good for just professional offices. So the developer decided to make it into apartments. And that was very challenging because as a high-rise building, it needed to be structurally retrofitted so that the contemporary earthquake codes would be met. So how to fit in a structural frame inside the building without affecting the way it looked on the outside and without affecting the way it could be used and the circulation patterns on the inside was quite challenging. And that involved working carefully with the engineers and going back and forth with building codes to try and figure out how to accomplish that. But it was really satisfying. And that's one of the first professional jobs that I worked on. You want some other examples?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. So another example, probably the smallest example, is a custom home that I did. And this was a married couple that were retiring, and they'd raised their 4 boys, and they had a lot that they had owned all the time that their kids were growing up. And it was a view lot overlooking Mission Bay Park. And they were very excited to build a wonderful house there so they would have that view that they had looked forward to all the time that they were raising their boys. Well, when they first talked to me, they said they wanted to downsize because their boys were grown and gone. But then I downsized, I gave them exactly the size that they wanted, and they looked at it and they said, "Oh no, this is not going to be big enough. We have so many friends. We entertain all the time." So then it was a matter of, okay, this is something we didn't talk about yet. Let's go and see how we can expand it. So that was another challenge. But it was a sloping site, so it had its own challenges, and it ended up, they wanted to have the level of the main floor at a certain elevation. Elevation means how high it is above the ground. And so they wanted to have it at a certain elevation because they knew from walking around the site that that's the height it needed, the floor needed to be in order for them to be able to see what they wanted to see in Mission Bay. And so that dictated how high where the building started. And then a challenge was, okay, now they have to park below the building. But then the additional challenge was the rules say that the top of the building cannot be higher than this particular elevation. So you had to squeeze it in. So by rules, I mean there's building codes and then there's zoning codes. So there's lots of rules to follow. And so that building had to be squeezed in. So that you have enough height inside and it's an appealing building to live in, and still have the floor in the right place and not go above the building height limit. But one of my favorite buildings that I did was a corporate headquarters. And that was challenging in a different way. And you can tell I'm talking about challenges because that's what I think is so much fun about the job.
Yeah.
So it was challenging in a different way because the owners of the building had a business that required SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission regulation. And that meant they had to have fail-safe power. So they had to have generator on site. And the building, the land that they wanted to acquire was in a city that had to approve the building before they bought the land, before it would sell the land to them. So we had to design a building just conceptually and then get the approval and then go into all the details of the building. So the conceptual design, I didn't have to, but I did interview their building department people, and that's where I got the clue that what the goal of the city was to have what we call a street wall. Instead of having all the parking spaces in front of the building, they wanted a building along the street so that when people walk along the street, they see a building and they have this appealing building to walk by instead of just a parking lot. So the parking lot needed to go behind. So the other designers apparently did not make that inquiry because the other designers had kind of strip mall designs, and my design had a 2-story building on the street. And so we were the winning designers, and I got to design that building. And the business said, to start with, we only need this much space, but we want to build 4 times that amount of space. So I had to figure out a way that the space could be used by 1, 2, 3, or 4 different businesses and all have their own exits and entrances, but also if it was only one user, that they didn't have to deal with too many entrances and exits from the street. So that was pretty cool.
For architecture, you were telling me about like so all the different designs and the things that you have to think about when designing a building. And I did a sort of, I wouldn't fully call it an internship, but kind of a real estate class that was basically, it was, we would visit different real estate firms and we would kind of learn about what they do. And my favorite one, I think by far, was the architecture one. And they do the architecture, kind of the design of the actual building, but then also interiors as well. And when it came to the actual designs of the buildings, Now they use a lot of computer programs, and you can even have 3D models of all of it. But there's also these big packets, these really big, like 100-page, 200-page packets of just like the designs and just everything labeled out. So is that stuff that you had to make when you were in
Absolutely. And
architecture?
we drew it all by hand. So I was in school. I got my master's degree in architecture in 1981. So at that time, there wasn't even a 2E. Oh, you don't even know what a 2E
No.
computer is, do you? That was the first personal computer, Apple IIe. That was the first personal computer. And Leo, my husband, bought one for our household, but it couldn't be used for business. It was too primitive. It was kind of like, you probably don't remember this either, but calculators started out with a 4-function calculator. It could add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And so my question was, when we got one, was, Leo, we can do all these things in our head mostly, or on paper in the amount of time that it takes to punch this information into this digital assistant. So why do we need this? So technology has come a long way. So
Yeah.
you were asking, did we do all of that? We drew it. And I kind of miss the opportunity, I miss the hand-drawn drawings because they're so beautiful. Each the Everybody draws differently, and even though you're drawing the same thing, when you're in an office and you've got a lot of different people, for instance, if you're doing a high-rise building, you might have 10 people working on the building, drawing different aspects of the building, and you want the drawings to look consistent, so everybody has to have a consistent style. But just like handwriting, you can tell who did what, and each person has a separate aesthetic. So using the computer, I think some of the visual beauty of the drawings was lost, but certainly there are a lot of advantages. We started using computers shortly, well, not too long before the end of my career, before I retired. But one of the things that I thought was most important is that as a project progresses, changes get made. Sometimes they're little, sometimes they're big. The hardest ones are the little ones that have a huge impact. And those are one of the things that we used to try and be very careful about was to only put information in the drawings one time. Because if you had the same information on numerous pages of the drawing, if you changed it on one place and maybe 4 other places, but you forgot to change it on the 5th place, then when the building was getting built, if the contractor was looking at the page that was not changed, then something goes amiss. So using the computer meant that the computer would keep track of where that information was on every page of the drawings and make sure that it got changed everywhere that it needed to be changed. And I think that AI is going to help in a particular way eventually, with the fact that when you're designing, you have to keep so many things in your mind at the same time. You have to keep the building codes, the zoning. You have to keep the earthquake requirements. You have to keep the user needs. You have to keep the materials you're using. You have to keep so many things in your mind at the same time as at each phase of the design, that it's a particular skill that needs a lot of practice to develop. And the designers that don't have that skill are the ones that you end up saying, that building, there's so many things wrong with it. The users get disappointed or the users get frustrated. Yeah, so AI is going to help a lot with that. But sort of like what I said earlier about calculators, about that four function calculator. So when you used a 4-function calculator, I taught my kids, you still have to know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, by hand. I don't know if you do anymore, because garbage in, garbage out. If you type in a wrong number and the answer you get is kind of a fantastical answer, you have to know that it is a fantastical answer, that that can't be right. I must have done something wrong making the entries. Well, the same with AI. So if we're going to use AI for designing buildings, we have to be sure that we really know all the different aspects so that if AI comes up with the fantastical answer, we know that's not realistic, something's wrong.
I really like how you were mentioning about the AI, especially because I think prompts for even something as simple as ChatGPT has been really emphasized on the results that you get and how different you can get of even if you ask it a simple question. So I really like your take on that, and especially on architecture, because I never thought about that on how that could affect the results on something as important as the design for a building. And so something that I was always really curious about in architecture, because like you were mentioning back then, the drawings, like you said, you had experience, you had to hand draw them and then having to change everything if you needed to change even a small aspect. But what is the teamwork and communication like when you have to do and go through that whole process that's even years in designing a building and the is it the blueprint? Is that what it's called? The blueprint for the building?
Yep, yes, maybe they're still called that. I don't know, but it's been a long time since they were actually blue. That changed when they were blueprints. You're too young for Xerox too. Xerox machines. Mimeograph machines. There used to be there were chemicals involved, and there was a unique smell, and it was kind of an intoxicating smell. I mean, you didn't get high or anything like that, but it was an intoxicating smell. But it was exciting because my drawings are getting printed. Yay! Now we're toward the end of the process. We've got blueprints, and we pour over the blueprints and send the blueprints to the developer, send the blueprints to the user, send the blueprints to the structural engineers, to the building department, everywhere. So they're sent all over. And that's where a particular aspect of architecture comes in, is that the architect is the leader of the team. So the team involves the architect, the engineers, the general contractors who are doing the building, the users, of course, the ones who are going to pay. Often the lenders get involved too. They evaluate the building. They send it through their appraisal process to see, is this building going to be worth the loan that the property owner wants to take out to build this building? Because most buildings are built with borrowed money. And so that's another aspect that an architect needs to understand, is some financial awareness. And there's the building inspectors and the plan checkers. Now, that plan check process has changed a lot since I was in my career. At the time that I was working, we really had a personal relationship with the plan checkers. The plan check departments, at least in the city of San Diego and National City and Chula Vista, which are cities that I worked in, you could develop a working relationship with plan checkers. You could call them on their personal lines, and you could discuss something that they felt needed change, and you could bring your rationale to them, because there's varying interpretations of building codes. And maybe the plan checker says, this doesn't meet this particular building code. And I could say, yes, it does. It does because of this and this and this, whatever reasoning that I had when I designed the building. So then the plan checker listens to me and says, okay, well, I can see this and this, but not that. So you have to change that. So there was that relationship. It's quite different now. There's more of a distance. And I think that's probably detrimental. I think that there's a lot lost in that. But the architect is the leader of a team. And so you have to bring all those team members together. We used to make a notebook, and the first page of the notebook was all the contact people, everybody that was on the team, their phone number, their email address, everything. Um, so that and that's very time consuming. And you have to consider that when you're trying to figure out how much do I charge for this, because it's not like doing yard care. Oh, it's going to take me 2 hours to do that, and this is how much I charge per hour. It's like, okay, this these are different kinds of problems. These are have different value sets to them. So I'm going to have use my assistant for this, and my assistant's time is worth this much, and my time is worth this much, and I'm going to use a consultant for that, and the consultant's bill is this. So I have to figure all of these things in, and then I have to say, oh, I've got overhead too. And so you have to include your overhead and decide how much you can charge for designing the project. And then sometimes there's a negotiation, but most of the time, if you've done a good job, then whoever wants you to design their project says, great, let's go. And then you get excited because it's time to start. But usually you have ideas before then, because you get as soon as you get a project, you start getting excited about it. And so while you're figuring out what it's going to take to design the project, your mind is churning.
Yeah. So for you, who would you advise to go into architecture? Because it sounds like a very more of a creative and also a very social job, having to work with many people, with like the city you mentioned, with a big team, because and also being a leader as well, because you're kind of the one who makes is the backbone of creating a building. So what kind of person would you advise to go into architecture?
Somebody really, one of their characteristics has to be attention to detail, because designing a building means you have to pay attention to safety. And there's so many details that go into a building. So attention to detail is a big one. Organizational skills, another big one. So you've highlighted the ones I'm excited about, which are the aesthetic opportunities. When it's aesthetic opportunities, I think someone that likes to walk down the street and look at buildings and think about the buildings and say, oh, I like that or I don't like that. An example, when I was a child, I was maybe 10 years old. There was a building being built across the street from my bus stop. So every day when I walked to the bus stop after school, I would be watching that building getting built. And there was a big wall in front of it. And it was a three-story building, I think. And when they took the fence down that was hiding the facade of the building, I was like, oh no, that building doesn't look right. I was so disappointed. So I paid attention even when I was a little kid to how buildings um, looked and worked. Because when I walked around with my dad was in real estate, and there was a lot of construction going on because it was post World War II. So a lot of homes were being built, and my dad sold homes. When we'd go into homes that were being built, the smell of the concrete, the smell of the new sawn wood, the framing of the building and looking through the framing, even how the finish of the concrete was, all of those things were important to me. So the details are important. And if you don't care about how the world looks, then you shouldn't be in architecture. I think that that architecture can really can enhance our experience of the world, or it can make us feel constrained and miserable, not just on the inside where we live, but on the outside. When you are looking at buildings that are are boring or ugly or run down, it really gives you a bad feeling about where you are in your life. So, or at least it does me. Maybe because that's what I care about. But I think in general, even for people who aren't so aware of it, that they can feel it, even if they're not conscious of it. So I think someone has to care about the world. And I hope that anyone who went into architecture would care about the environment, because the way that we build and the things that we build really have an effect on the environment. I'm really proud of California because we passed a lot of rules about how to build buildings, not just for earthquake safety, but for environmental impact. So some of the rules that we passed were about how much insulation has to go into a building and what kind of use of electricity, just a huge number of things that are regulated that mean that we use less power to power a building and less power to build a building. And we have the building built in such a way that it requires less maintenance. So all of these things help us preserve our environment. So I think I didn't hit on probably mm, time management. Time management. Because once you've made that proposal and said, this is how much it's going to cost you to pay me to build it, to design this building for you, if you can't manage your time properly and you can't manage the time of your employees and how much time it takes you to do so many different things that need to be done, then you lose money and it's hard to stay in business. And if you're an employee of an architect and you can't manage your time, then you're costing your boss money and you might not be able to hold a job because you can't manage your time. So time management is an important one. Um, I think pragmatism, because time management kind of pragmatism. It's like, okay, we have gone this far with the design at this stage. So do we need to do all of the details now, or do we need to pay attention to some other aspect of the project? So pragmatism is important to have an understanding of what makes sense to do when.
So for you in your experience, so you said you got a master's in architecture.
Yes.
And so from you were telling me, you were always very aware and very detail oriented because, like you said, your dad sold homes. And so you were likely always very curious about like the whole process and you kind of likely knew you wanted to go into architecture. So is there anything that you did throughout high school and going into college that you would say helped you go into architecture or helped you throughout your career?
Well, this is going to be a funny thing because I told you I had those experiences when I was a child with my dad, and watching the buildings go up. But when I was a child, women didn't become architects. Um, and it never occurred to me that I could be an architect. I was interested in fashion design. I wanted to be a fashion designer, and I learned to sew from my mother and my grandmother. And I made a lot of my own clothes. I made all my prom dresses. And when I got married, I made my children's clothes. I even made a sport coat for Leo, my husband. So when I was in architecture school, when I was in high school, it just so happened that my father left our family and my mother became a single mother of 4 children. And that was very traumatic for our family. And I thought to myself, it really, fashion design is quite a risky business. So I do not want to do that. And when I went to college, they asked me if I wanted to be a teacher or a nurse. And I said, well, I sure don't want to be a nurse because I'm not a very sympathetic person. My children will tell you that. So I studied to be a teacher. Then I got married and had children, and I yearned for a more aesthetic outlet to my talents. And it just so happens that all the kinds of things that you do with making a garment are the kinds of things you do with making a building. You have to consider the materials. You have to consider the strength of the thread and the size of the thread and the needles that you put on the sewing machine and the way the fabric stretches or doesn't stretch and the thickness of the fabric and all different kinds of things. And that really applies to architecture because when I was in school, some of my fellow students said, how do you figure this out so easily? And I said, well, it's all my experience with sewing that makes it possible for me to figure these things out. And the other thing is in general ed classes in college, because people complain, 2 years of general ed, stuff we don't want to know, stuff we don't care about. In high school, I'm sure you've said that or heard that from other students. Why do I have to study this or that or the other? I'm never going to use this. But the thing is, in college, I had geology classes and geography classes and all kinds of other classes that came in completely handy. Oh, I even had speech arts classes. And when I had to make presentations to government agencies and clients and that sort of thing, oh, how to organize a speech, how to deliver a speech, all of those things came in very handy and made it easy to do all of the other kinds of things that an architect needs to do other than learning how to do the drawings and learning all the rules and regulations. But did that answer your
Yeah.
question?
That's really cool how you were able to implement that. And that, I mean, that's amazing, on being able to shift your career, doing
Well,
that.
I have to comment that I think one of the most important things is I think it's becoming more and more important. The concept of transferable skills. So a lot of people think they learn a particular thing and that's the thing they know how to do. But they're not looking at all of the range of things that are involved in a particular skill. If you, let me see if I can think of something. Think of something really simple that you might know how to do, and I'll tell you about some transferable skills that you might not have thought about.
Maybe writing.
Writing, okay. So if you are writing an essay, you mean, or a short story or something like that?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have some creativity. You have to think of a topic. Then you have to organize the ideas by paragraph and sentence structure. And you have to be able, well, you've got some manual dexterity because you're doing it on the computer, I'm sure. So there's and then you have some thinking skills. You might need some research skills. You might need some interview skills. So there's all kinds of things involved in that. So you might be a journalist and say, oh, well, I can write, but I can't do all these other things. But you have so many other skills that are involved in being a journalist or a writer of any kind that you can apply to so many other aspects of your life or different professions. So a lot of people change professions. Lots of people do. Sometimes only when they retire, and sometimes they're required to because they lose jobs and they need to find something else to support their families, or just because they get bored and they want something else to do.
Yeah, I really like that idea, and I mean, yeah, advice of, learning a transferable skill, because I think that's something that's very important, even just finding, the right career for you and what you want to learn. And also, like you mentioned, how all the skills that we learn at school or that we just learn throughout life aren't just to just know them, but they actually come in handy one day. For high school students that don't really know what career they would like to focus on or go into, what would be your advice for them discovering different paths that they should try to follow or try to investigate different careers?
Oh, that's a really good question. You ask very good questions. Uh, let me think about that. Well, work experience is important if they can get work experience. Um, even working for Starbucks or McDonald's or something like that gives you work experience. Um, it doesn't give you experience with a variety of different careers, but whenever you are in a customer service business, sometimes it's too fast paced, but other times you have the opportunity to talk to people and ask them what business they're in, what they do. So anytime, I would recommend actually that any high school student who wants to get a job would look for a job that gives them the opportunity to talk with a diverse clientele. The opportunity just to even exchange a little bit of a chat, like, oh, what kind of work are you in? And the person tells you, well, I'm I'm a coder, or I'm a mason, or I'm a tree trimmer, or I'm and if somebody says they're a tree trimmer, well, then, oh, are you an arborist? Because an arborist takes a lot of study because you have to know all about different ways to trim the tree and what's healthy for the tree and what isn't. And maybe then they learn a little bit about landscape architecture and oh, trees are really interesting to me. Ah, you're a tree trimmer. Oh, tell me more about it. And then you think, that might be a good career for me, just being a landscape architect. I love that idea. So, and no matter what kind of a career it is, and you talked about college goals. I don't think there's a lot of jobs that you don't have to go to college for that are wonderful, fulfilling jobs and that are lucrative jobs. They pay well. Um, so I think it's important for someone to know whether they actually do want to go to college. And sometimes people don't want to go because they're afraid of it. And sometimes people say, oh, my son-in-law, when he was in high school, he was told that he wasn't college material. But he is a really smart man. But he was told he wasn't college material, so he took a different tack. He was always interested in taking things apart and putting them back together again. So he's an auto mechanic, but not only is he an auto mechanic, he owns his own business. And he is a volunteer firefighter in the small town that they live in, and he became the fire chief, which is a paid position, unlike the rest of the firefighters. And so he's not college educated, but he is a really smart man. And he is a leader in the community and highly respected and looked up to and relied upon in so many different ways. So I think that it's important for someone not to think that college is the only way to get on in life, because it isn't. So many of the people I know are not college educated, and they've still had a great life, and might be harder in the future, but I think it more depends on what you do with what you know than how you got what you know, whether it's in college or life skills. I remind myself that Lincoln was reading by firelight, and our founding fathers read books. They read and they read and they read, and they had experience because they were managing their farmsteads and their estates and that sort of thing. So paying attention to what's going on around you, I think, is probably the most important thing you can do. A lot of that's a concern so many grown-ups now have, that kids your age are engrossed in their phones and they're not paying attention to the world around them and the people around them. You kind of get lost in that situation. You're isolated, and how can you expand and build a life for yourself if you are so constrained? So I think it's really important for wake up, open your eyes, look around, pay attention, talk to people, talk to people. And some people are really shy, and it's hard. It's hard to talk to people when you're shy. But if you're in a service-oriented profession or job, just a job, it gives you opportunities to talk to people about things that are natural, and you don't have to, like, oh, I never know what to say to someone, or, oh, gee, I'm always afraid I'll say something stupid or something like that. You think that's why people are shy, because they're afraid they'll say something stupid, or they're afraid what people are usually people that are really shy. Maybe they're afraid of something, afraid of embarrassing themselves. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not too sure. I think for me, because um, I think up till sixth grade, I was more on the shy end. I wouldn't really, I wasn't very outgoing. But it was until I think sixth or seventh grade when I kind of decided whether I wanted to be the person who kind of like holds himself back and doesn't ask questions, doesn't want to learn. Because at the end of the day, no one's going to be perfect. And for me, even in class, like I'm not, I'm always usually the person who raises their hand to even read out loud or ask any questions, because it's always learning. And in the beginning, I'll be honest, I think it was freshman year was when I started like reading out loud when we would read books together in class. And I was very bad. I was always probably like really slow at doing it. But now, I mean, I realized, I think last week I was reading um, a page because we were reading out loud in class. And now I'm just like smoother with it. I read a lot quicker. And I think it just helps, every time in class, even if you're just reading one or two pages out loud, it helps with your confidence speaking out. So I think, yeah, you're completely hitting the spot on that.
Yeah,
Um,
I think communication is really the key to success in life, in relationships too. Because if you don't know how to express yourself, or if you are, um, if you don't ask good questions, asking questions. When I was in high school, well, even probably in elementary school, they would always tell us there's no stupid question. Just because if you don't know something, unless you ask, you're not going to find out. And now I tell you, my phone is my handy thing. Oh boy, do I use Microsoft, no, what is it? Wikipedia, all the ways to find information. That's something that I think it's just incredible with knowledge at our fingertips now. But if one of the things that happens, and my daughter's talked about this, um, she looks something up that she's really interested in, and then she gets hooked, and the feeds come in, and she gets more and more, and then she finds that an hour has passed by, and she's still on the phone, and she long ago learned what she needed to know or wanted to know, and now she's been reading irrelevant stuff all this time. Now, that we used to do that with encyclopedias, books. um, and but there's only so long you can get engrossed in an encyclopedia. Although my brother was, my brother could have been in a contest with how long you could read an encyclopedia without deciding that you should be doing something else. So information, but information that is usable in your life. But as I just said earlier, You never know when you're going to use it. All the things that we learn in elementary school, in high school, in college, we can apply them in different ways in life, but talking, communicating really is the key. And communicating on paper, you mentioned being a writer. So learning how to communicate on paper, do you find that sometimes texts and emails get misinterpreted?
I think a lot of times, especially if you don't know how to put emotion into it, like I focus a lot on, I really like marketing. That's what I've been focusing on for the last year and a half. And writing, I think, is one of it's probably the main focus that you should learn on copywriting because if you don't know how to deliver your message to a potential customer or someone you want to sell to, then I mean, it's kind of over from there from the very beginning.
Yes, that's a really good point. And when you talk about copywriting, that isn't that one of the issues with AI is that AI gleans information from everything that's available on the internet, and now everything's on the internet. But wasn't it Google that was trying to copy every book that's ever been written onto the make it digital and available? I think it was Google years ago.
I'm not too sure, but very likely.
Yeah. And so when you're talking about copyright, that's actually architectural documents are copyrighted also. So if you have a building built and you want to use it, you want to build that same building someplace else, you have to get permission from the architect and you have to pay them again. Maybe not the same price, but you have to pay them again for using that same building. You've seen places where identical buildings are built, like all the Taco Bells and all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. So buildings do get rubber stamp kind of things. But even so, if it's built in a different city or a different state, there's different rules there. And so things have to be modified to meet the requirements in another place. And especially if you're like when we build in Southern California, far different than building in Michigan or Maine or someplace like that because they have weather. But one of the things that's interesting is when we studied earthquake design, it turns out that design for wind loads is very similar to earthquake design. So when you see newsreels about tornadoes that have been happening so much in the past few years, and the roofs are blown off buildings, those roofs aren't fastened down the way they're supposed to be. They're probably older buildings, not new ones, that didn't have the building codes that were specific to wind loads. And in California, buildings didn't used to be fastened to the foundation, and now they are anchored in special ways to the foundation.
So I think kind of closing off on for high school students to be able to take away advice. Um, I think my first of two questions is so you were telling me about how during your career there were some challenges, not just like regular challenges, but also through your identity because you felt that when you got married, you kind of lost who you were and these different challenges that you had. Like even you said you couldn't even have your own bank account and
Right.
it had to be Leo who would have to manage that and basically give you permission to use your own money. So
Yes.
when it comes to like challenges like that, what helped you get through that and be able to get to the point where you're at for your career?
Um, you do ask really good questions. That's very insightful. Well, I have to tell you that I did feel quite depressed for quite some time about that, really feeling that I was um, relegated to being a non-person. Um, in one of the things that happened in particular was Leo was in the Navy and he was sent to Vietnam. And at the time, we had two children, um, and one was 7 months old and one was 2 years old because they were pretty close together in age. And he was gone for a year. So I missed him quite a lot, of course, but it was my job to take care of the family and to do all of the financial stuff and manage the upkeep on the car and all the other kinds of things. And I kind of found myself again because I had been, I'd already graduated from college and I'd worked my way through college. So I had managed my own life and finances for years already before I got married. And then for the 3 years that we were married before Leo went to Vietnam, um, I was managing the household, but not other things about our life. And of course, we were partners. And Leo's a very good person. So it was never like he was, I'm the boss and you have to do what I say sort of thing. But it just was a different feeling. So when he was about to come home from Vietnam, I wrote him a letter and I said, you're not coming home to the girl you left behind. You're coming home to the woman you married. Because I realized that I had actually allowed myself to feel like I was nothing. And that was a big mistake. I'm a pretty assertive person now. But that was a matter of really thinking it through and making a realization of what kind of a life I wanted to live. Did I want to live a life like a doormat, or did I want to live a life where I was a player in my own life? And I wanted to be a player. I wanted to be a person that had choices to make and could make my own mistakes. And we do make our own mistakes. As I tell my kids, so you make a decision and then you have to live with it. Because if you make your mistakes, then you have to figure out, okay, I shouldn't have done that. I should have done this other thing instead. Now, how do I fix it? How do I get back on track from the mistake that I made? And that's the thing is taking responsibility for yourself and realizing that it's not the world's job. It's not somebody else's job to make your life for you. It's your own job to create your own life. And fortunately, most of us are intelligent enough to do that. If we understand that that's something that we can do. Now, you talked about your audience being largely Hispanic.
Yeah.
It's a difficult time right now. It's kind of scary for some Hispanic people.
Yeah.
Even for some that are natural born Americans that are not immigrants or green card or, you know, there's so many different layers. There's you can legal immigrant, green card, permanent resident. I have friends that were telling me about all the different layers that of how to be living in the United States, and I was astonished because I never knew there were so many different categories that you could be in. So it's a scary time. I think the important thing to remember is there are resources out there. So when I say, okay, you can be let me say it, the architect of your own life. You can be the designer of your own life. But and you have to realize that you have personal power, and that you're not a doormat, that you can decide where you want to go in life. But we all need other people, and building relationships, interconnecting, those are important things. So your Hispanic friends, relatives, the listeners that you have out there, don't let yourself be isolated. Don't think, well, I'm Hispanic and all my friends are Hispanic and all my relatives are Hispanic and these I only know Hispanic people and but you know what? There are plenty of Hispanic people that are attorneys, that are architects. In fact, what my first paid job that I had, one of my coworkers was Hispanic, and he was raised in San Isidro, and he was a really delightful young man, and we had a great time. And another co-worker was first generation Japanese American. So, people come from all over the place, but building connections. So that's another good reason to be in a service-oriented job, because you can't, if you feel like most of your world, you're surrounded by Hispanics, being in a service-oriented profession, you can reach out. You can begin to feel comfortable in other environments and say that I'm not I don't have to be pigeonholed. I don't have to have a narrow vision of what my future is. I can reach out to these people. I can make connections. I can build bridges. And I think that's a really important thing to know. As a young woman growing up as a girl, when I was a child, I didn't know that. I didn't know that I could reach out to all kinds of different people. And it was only as an adult that I understood that we're all connected and that the world is full of people who like to help and want to be friends.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that advice that you gave, and especially during these times where it's really scary. And when Trump came into office, it was a really scary time, especially here in San Diego. And I think one of the things that mainly I think bothered me about the situation was that it wasn't put on mainstream media. And a lot of what happens is, where there's a lot of things that happen with the, Asian community, African American community, and all these things are always put to light through schools. In our school, we'll have assemblies about it. But when it came to the situation that was happening, nothing was said, not a single thing, not reaching out to the community if we needed any help. And it was kind of just put under a cover and not really talked about. So that's something that I think that Hispanics should have really stood up about.
That is a great example. But if you want to find a place to get support because you're saying, okay, we don't talk about it at school. And Michelle mentioned that too. That you don't talk about it at school. Where you go is where you go to church. Pope Francis talked about it a lot. We lost him. It's going to be really interesting to see who the conclave of cardinals comes up with to replace Bishop Pope Francis. But at church, our congregation talks about it. Our leaders at our church talk about it a lot. Our bishops in the community talk about it. There's support in the Catholic Church for immigrant communities and for, I just had a lunch yesterday with a friend of mine who's has a very interesting job. She has a private business, and her business supports nonprofit organizations that support immigrant communities. And I think she helps them with fundraising and all kinds of other, the vast amount of paperwork that has to be done and lots of different things. So I don't know a lot about her job, but one of the things that she was talking about yesterday that she was very emotionally overwrought about is the state, the way the immigrants from Afghanistan have been sent out of the 10,000, she said. We brought the Afghanistan people here to the United States after Biden ended the war in Afghanistan. They were the translators. They were the people that facilitated the abilities of the armed forces in Afghanistan. And of course, with the Taliban in charge now, they go back, they're going to be incarcerated or killed. And they're being sent back. They're being deported to Afghanistan, thousands and thousands of them. And she's incredibly distressed at the injustice of this, because the reason they would be killed or incarcerated when they get sent back is because they supported the United States. So there's some horrifying things going on.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing the interview today. I for sure learned a ton about architecture and some amazing advice.
Thank you for the interview. I really enjoyed talking with you, Miguel. I always enjoy talking with you, but this was really a fun thing to do. Thank you.